Our speaker today, Andrew Seidel, got his undergraduate degree from Tulane University in neuroscience and environmental science. Now that might be the first mistake right there, because you start getting involved in the science stuff and it can lead to rational thinking, and then you don't know where you're going to go with that. He went on to Tulane University Law School. He studied human rights and international law at the University of Amsterdam and traveled the world on semester at sea, which sounds like a lot of fun to me. Last year, he completed his Master of Laws at Denver University Sturm College of Law. And by the way, this entire academic career has been with the highest academic honors. And he soon joined the Freedom from Religion Foundation as a constitutional consultant and now staff attorney. Somewhere along this, in his school career, he also read The God Delusion, which is, I guess, the second mistake, and his future path was set. Now, he's since written a book on international human rights law and is presently working on a book in his spare time, he tells me, on today's topic. But just so we don't think he's all work and no fun, he's also a former Grand Canyon tour guide and an accomplished nature photographer, and his work has been displayed in several galleries throughout the country. But our topic for today is debunking the Christian nation myth. Andrew will discuss the history of the persisting popular mythical claims the United States was founded as a Christian nation and on Judeo-Christian principles. Spoiler alert, the answer is no. Okay. Please welcome Andrew Seidel.
Thank you very much for having me. Steve, I really appreciate the invite. And for those of you who didn't get to go to Free Thought Fest last year, it's actually going on again this year. Some kind of big news for that group at UW-Madison. They actually just got a $68,000 grant from the college to put on basically secular counseling. The Catholic Church got $98,000, I think, for the past 5 years each year. So the secular group said, well, we'd like to get some of that money as well, and we'll counsel students who are having doubts. So this is what they're going to do with that money. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about the myth that we are a Christian nation, specifically that we were founded as a Christian nation. And kind of going along with that is this other myth that we're founded on Judeo-Christian principles. And the perfect example of this was when John McCain was running to become the Republican candidate. On September 28th, he said that the Constitution established the United States of America as a Christian nation. And most of you are probably well enough equipped to rebut that claim. You could cite the Treaty of Tripoli, which says that we're in no sense founded on the Christian religion. You know that our Constitution is an entirely godless document. It doesn't mention God or religion except to exclude religion from the government. But it's much harder to get to the second claim, the claim that we're founded on Judeo-Christian principles. And so that's what John McCain fell back on a couple days later. Well, what I really meant to say was we're founded on Judeo-Christian values and principles. And that's the claim that I would like to spend a little bit more time addressing today. So we're going to deal with both of them, but we're going to kind of try to focus on the principle aspect, because that is the harder claim to challenge, and I would like for that to start being the norm. I would like for everybody to get out there and make that challenge. So the evidence that supports the idea that we're a Christian nation typically falls into these three categories. We're in one nation because our coins say "In God We Trust," so does our dollar bills, or because the pledge says "One nation under God." The Declaration of Independence founded us as a Christian nation, or the Founding Fathers were all Christian, and therefore they had to have founded a Christian nation. So let's take them one at a time. In God we trust, and one nation under God. Obviously, there's two kind of major things to think about here. First is the timing, which you can see they're not from the founding generation. And the second is the effect of these phrases. Okay? So the timing of them, they're not from the founding generation. In God We Trust was added to our coins in 1863 for the first time, to our paper money in 1956, and Under God was added to the pledge in 1954. Okay? Now, this timing is very suggestive. So historically, in times of national crisis, civil rights have been curtailed, pushed back, and that's kind of what you were seeing during these times. So in 1863, the nation is tearing itself apart. This is the middle of the Civil War. Battle of Gettysburg was fought that year. President Lincoln, for the first time, suspended habeas corpus. The only other president to do that was W. after 9/11. So you have the country literally tearing itself apart. Brothers are killing brothers. The country may become divided. And Christian nationalists, and that's the term that I'm going to use for people who kind of purport to support this myth, who say that we are founded on a Christian nation. Christian nationalists took that opportunity to push for "In God We Trust" on our coins. And it's important because they actually thought that the time was propitious for the introduction. It's propitious and appropriate because it's an hour of national peril and danger. Okay? So they recognize that the country is tearing itself apart and that everybody is scared. So now is our chance. Let's seize that fear and we'll inject God into the place that it hasn't had the opportunity to be yet. You have the same thing happening in 1954 and 1956. Okay? You guys probably recognize Joseph McCarthy here. He was famous for his witch hunts. This is the height of McCarthyism and the Red Scare. We had the bomb. Russia got the bomb in 1955. They got the hydrogen bomb in 1955. We got our hydrogen bomb, which was 450 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb, shortly before that. The Korean War began that year. McCarthy rose to power. He published his book, Witch Hunts for Non-Believers. If you do not conform, you are automatically suspect. Okay? Actually, Chief Justice Earl Warren, at this point in time, he said that if the Bill of Rights were put to a vote, it would lose. And I was just reading a really interesting book the other day. I haven't had a chance to work this in. This was earlier this week. But a Madison reporter from the Madison Capital-Times, during this time, during 1954, he went out onto the street with a petition, trying to get people to sign on to this petition. And the petition was quotes from the Declaration of Independence and from the Bill of Rights. Only one person out of 110 signed it. Everybody else thought that it was too subversive and too anti-American to sign on. So that should give you an idea of the kind of fear that was going on at this point in time. And Senator McCarthy actually warned that this is the era of the Armageddon, the final all-out battle between light and darkness foretold in the Bible. Billy Graham rose to fame at this point in time, and he was constantly warning of the threat of godless, atheistic communism. Okay? So this is the time when a lot of the kind of ceremonial deism that you see nowadays in our government, the first prayer breakfasts were held then. President Eisenhower was actually baptized in office by Billy Graham. A lot of this kind of religious fervor centered around the fear of sort of total annihilation. Okay? So these phrases do not actually support the notion that we're a Christian nation. They support the notion that Christian nationalists will take advantage of our fear and inject religion where it doesn't belong. Now, the second thing that I mentioned is important about these is the effect that these phrases have. Religion is divisive. I don't think this is a very controversial claim to make to a friendly audience like this. James Madison and all the founders really recognize this. A zeal for different opinions concerning religion have divided mankind into parties and inflamed them with mutual animosity. Virtually every one of the founders has some excellent quotes about how religion is very divisive. So you have this, our original motto, E pluribus unum, from many one, from many states, one nation, from many people, one nation, is this unifying theme. It was attempting to bring us together. Instead, you take religion, which is an incredibly divisive theme, as we just mentioned, and you wipe out the motto that unifies and you insert one that's divisive. Now, the same thing happened with the Pledge of Allegiance, except in this case, it's a little bit more ridiculous because they actually we had one nation indivisible. Our nation can't be divided. And they divided it with God. And they stuck it right in the middle intentionally. It is funny, but I mean, it's pretty tragic as well. Okay? So these phrases, and there's a lot of other phrases that people use to support, but these are the ones that you hear most of the time. They don't show that we're founded as a Christian nation. They show that people are willing to use times of fear to kind of force their religion onto everybody else. So the Declaration of Independence is the second one that I mentioned. There are 4 specific references in the Declaration of Independence that people use to support the idea that we are a Christian nation or a nation founded on Judeo-Christian principles. The laws of nature and of nature's God, their creator, the supreme judge of the world, and divine providence. The first thing to notice is none of these is Judeo-Christian. Not a single one of them mentions the God of Abraham or Yahweh or Jesus or Christ. These are very, at most, you could call them deistic. And the three men who drafted this, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Ben Franklin. Thomas Jefferson drafted the original, and then it went to the committee, and Ben Franklin and John Adams kind of weighed in the most. The only one that was in the original that Thomas Jefferson included was the laws of nature and of nature's God. And we actually have, hang on. We actually have the rough draft that Jefferson wrote. And so you can go back and look at that, and you can see that the only one he had in there was the laws of nature and of nature's God. And we actually know exactly what he meant when he was making that reference. This is referring to natural law, and there's two interpretations of natural law. There's the idea that we have our rights by virtue of being human, and that those rights are ascertainable by reason. And the second idea is that rights are given by divine grant. And we know exactly which one Jefferson was referring to because in other documents he specifically said what he thought. So in his opinion on the French treaties, he said that questions of natural right are triable by their conformity with the moral sense and reason of man. And then a free people claiming their rights as derived from the laws of nature, not as the gift of their chief magistrate. So as derived from the laws of nature, not as a gift, and they must be claimed. Okay? So we know what Jefferson was writing when he added this, when he was using this phrase. So the three other references were added in by Franklin and John Adams. The question then becomes, well, why would they add in those phrases? So you have to remember what the Declaration of Independence was doing. It wasn't establishing our nation. There are some scholars who will argue that it actually is the founding document. I disagree with that. It's pretty explicit that it was severing our political ties with Great Britain. It uses that language pretty regularly. So it wasn't actually setting up any type of government for the United States. That was the Articles of Confederation and then later the Constitution. So the real purpose of the Declaration of Independence was to justify our revolution both to the king and to the world. And they actually said to a candid world. So as these men, I'm sorry here, we're having a little technical difficulties with my remote here. It's not, the timing's going off. So as these men are drafting this, why would they add in the other references? And I think it's because it's kind of persuasion 101 to speak to your audience. Okay? First of all, Adams was a lawyer. And we all know that lawyers will say anything to win an argument. And Franklin was a pragmatic persuader, which I'll get to in a minute. But they were writing to this guy. This is King George III. And King George III believed that he ruled by divine sanction. He was the head of the church. He was a self-proclaimed Christian hero and a Christian king. And actually, he believed that God protected him from assassination attempts, of which there were 3. So he got away 3 times, and then really that kind of fostered the belief that he was something very special. Franklin, the pragmatic persuader, when he was I'm just going to stop using this and go over here. When he was our envoy to France during the Revolutionary War, he used to wear this coonskin cap around. He dressed kind of very rustically, and he did this because he was playing to the French idea of the rustic American. Right? They had this notion of what we are, and he played right into it to get us ships, to get us support for the war. So he's not above using any means at his disposal to get what he wants, essentially. But the most important thing to remember about the Declaration of Independence and why it doesn't kind of contribute to the idea that we're founded as a Christian nation is because it fundamentally conflicts with Christian principles. Okay? So the Declaration says it's a duty, a right, and necessary to throw off tyrannical governments. Okay? That governments are instituted among men and they derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. Okay? So power comes from the people, and people have a right to throw off their government whenever they don't agree with what it's doing. Okay? The Bible specifically contradicts this idea. So the Christian principles specifically contradict the Declaration of Independence. So this is from Paul's letter to the Romans. There is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against that which God has instituted. I mean, this is a specific contradiction of all of the values of 1776 and of our revolution. Okay? And it's not just this one particular spot of the Bible. This is actually a theme throughout the Bible. Another excellent source for this is Daniel 4. You shall be driven away from human society until you have learned that the Most High has sovereignty over the kingdom of mortals and gives it to whom he will. So power to govern comes from God. And that idea was explicitly rejected both in our Constitution and in the Declaration of Independence. I mean, the first three words of the Constitution, which are rather heavily emphasized, are "we the people." Not "God the powerful has granted us." Okay? So, the Declaration of Independence does not in any way support the idea that we are founded as a Christian nation. And the final argument about the Christian nation is the faith of the founding fathers. Okay? And this fight has actually been going on. Nowadays this is there's quotesmanship back and forth. You hear it all the time. But this has actually been going on since 1800. So George Washington died in 1799. And the year after his death, a man named Parson Weems, that's a picture of him, wrote this book, The Life of George Washington, with curious anecdotes. Parson Weems was a religious leader at the time. This is the book that gives us the myth of George Washington not telling a lie after chopping down the cherry tree. This also gives us the worst myth of George Washington praying in the snow at Valley Forge. It actually doesn't even come from the first edition of his book. It comes, I think, from the 17th edition of his book. So after it had been out for many, many years, after Washington had died, more than 25 years after the battle at Valley Forge, this story surfaced for the first time. There's actually a church that's supposed to be on the site of where it happened, even though nobody can really identify that. Anyway, that's beside the point. So first of all, the claim that all the founders were Christian and therefore established a Christian nation, I think, is incredibly rude. I think it's rude for two reasons. One, because it's demonstrably false. Ben Franklin says explicitly a number of times that he is not a Christian. He does not adhere to any sect. Now, they may be believers of some stripe. They may be deists, but they're certainly not Christian. Not all of them, anyway. And second, attributing to God or to a particular religion what the founders worked so hard to achieve, I think is incredibly degrading. I mean, the monumental sacrifice of this generation, what they did so that future generations could live a free life and have self-government, to attribute that to a divine, all-powerful being, I think, is just absurdly rude. Arrogant, too. But more importantly, the faith of the founders is not really relevant. Okay? Religious ideas don't claim ownership over other ideas generated by that mind. Okay? So there's no such thing as Jewish blue jeans. They're just blue jeans. There's no such thing as Jewish vaccines. They're just vaccines. And there's no such thing as Muslim math or Muslim zero. Okay? These ideas were generated by religious people, but we don't ascribe them with any religious significance. Stephen just told me he developed one of the instruments down here to kind of sync these microphones up. It's not an atheist instrument for syncing microphones, all right? So to all of a sudden claim that our nation was Christian because some of these people may be Christians, I think is incredibly outlandish. So whatever the founders thought privately is irrelevant. But we also know what they did publicly. They chose to erect a wall of separation between state and church. This is actually the text from Jefferson's letter that gives us that phrase. So no matter what they believed privately, they publicly decided that it was best to keep the two things separate. The Constitution, again, only mentions religion to prohibit the government from interfering in it and to prohibit it from interfering with the government. Okay? So that's kind of the Christian nation argument, kind of destroyed in a little bit of a nutshell. I tried to touch on the Judeo-Christian principles there, but now I want to focus explicitly on the Judeo-Christian principles, because this, again, is the argument that goes unchallenged most of the time. So hopefully all of you have asked yourself this question by now, which is, what are Judeo-Christian principles? This is an incredibly nebulous term, and this is the reason I think that it's so hard for a lot of people to kind of fight back against that claim that we're founded on Judeo-Christian principles, because it's kind of a meaningless phrase almost. And it actually took me, when I was doing research for this, quite a while to find somebody who would say, give an affirmative statement about what we're talking about here. And that was one of our presidents. This is President Truman. He happened to be president from 1945 to 1953 when McCarthy was rising to power. He was known for his plain speaking, the occasional use of expletives, and somewhat of a kind of rudeness. But I think this is one of the worst things he probably ever said. The fundamental basis of all government is in this Bible right here, and it started with Moses on the Mount. So Moses on the Mountain is the Ten Commandments. So and then he also said the fundamental basis of our Bill of Rights comes from the teachings we get from Exodus, St. Matthew, Isaiah, and St. Paul. Okay? I mean, in a nutshell, it can be found in the Ten Commandments and the Bible. So what I decided to do was to look at the Ten Commandments and at the Bible and pull out some of the most important Judeo-Christian principles that I could find and see how they stacked up against the founding principles of our nation. So first, we'll go ahead and look at the Ten Commandments.
Lord, the Lord Jehovah has given unto you these 10 commandments for all to obey.
Okay. So, when you get to the Ten Commandments, you hear this claim. NFFRF has 2 lawsuits going on. There's 10 Commandments on school grounds, and they're there because they want kids to reflect on the influence they've had on our nation's history, apparently. So this is a claim that actually has real-world consequences. But the first thing that you need to ask when you're kind of encountering this claim is, well, which 10 Commandments are you talking about? In any Bible that you see, there's actually 4 sets of 10 Commandments within a given Bible. Okay? So the first set, Moses gets on the mountain, and he displays a somewhat Brooksian recklessness with those. He smashes the first set. So he comes down off the mountain, and he sees his followers worshiping a golden calf. And so his response is to smash the word of God on the ground. Now, you also have to understand that the reason he was so upset was because his followers were violating a commandment on which they had not yet been instructed. Right? So, and his response is to slaughter. He orders the slaughter of 3,000 of his friends, brothers, and neighbors. Friends, brothers, and neighbors is the exact phrase in the Bible. And mark the term neighbors, because we're going to see that again later. That's important. And so, after he gets, God's moral law, he kills 3,000 of his good friends. So God orders him to make a new set of 10 commandments. And in that set, he promises to wipe all the inhabitants off the land of Israel from the face of the earth, so that the Jews can then take that land. So this is the second set, and with it, God seals the pact with genocide. The third set is issued in Deuteronomy, and it's substantially similar to the first set. The second set it's a little disturbing if you read it. God lays claim to the firstborn of Israel. And this is also the one where he claims that you can't boil a kid in its mother's milk. It's very strange. And they're not talking about children. They're talking about this type of kid. But the third set is substantially similar. And then the fourth set is just a list of people who are cursed. And it's very, very concerned with the sexual behavior of people as well. So even the Bible itself can't agree on which 10 commandments are the 10 commandments. I found the claim the question which 10 to be very effective when combating this claim. Then there are also different translations of Bibles, and different religious sects assign different numbers to the particular sets of 10 commandments. Okay? So, for instance, you can see there is a little chart that I've made which kind of breaks down some of the different religious sects and how they believe the 10 commandments should be numbered. Because in the Bible, there is no numbering. It doesn't say this is the first one, this is the second one. It's just one long list. Now, these may seem like small religious differences. It may seem the fact that the King James Bible says you shall not kill, whereas other versions say you shall not murder. That may not seem like a big difference. But there is no such thing as a small religious difference. Okay? When you have the absolute truth, when you have that belief, absolute certainty given to you from God, there can be no brooking any type of dissent. Right? So, for instance, this is a religious sect in the 1800s in Russia. They were supposed to interpret the Holy Book to say that Jesus Christ was the Redeemer, and he told his followers to go out and be fruitful and multiply. They translated it like this, so that Jesus was the castrator and told people to go out and castrate themselves. It's a very small difference, but it has a really big world impact. And this sect, as you can imagine, died out pretty quickly. Evolution at work. So I'm going to use the Protestant version of the Ten Commandments. I'm going to use the first version of the Ten Commandments that shows up in the Bible because of Charlton Heston. Most people are familiar with that one. And we'll go through those and we'll see how they stack up against our law. So, I am the Lord your God is the first commandment. But you have to read the whole thing. Because if you read these monuments, they actually just kind of cut them off. They heavily edit the word of God. It's amazing. I brought you out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. Okay? So, this is the claim that God is superior. And this completely conflicts with our Constitution. First of all, Article 6, Clause 2 of the Constitution says that Constitution is the supreme law of the land, not God. And also, remember, we the people make the law, so it technically declares the people supreme. Okay? And again, the Constitution also explicitly separates religion and government. So if this were to be, for instance, a law, it would be held unconstitutional almost immediately. So this actually conflicts with our foundations. The second commandment, you shall not make yourself any idol, and you shall not bow down and worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of the parents to the third and fourth generation for those who reject me. So again, you have to read the whole commandment. So this actually threatens the innocent children with punishment because of something their parents have done. So obviously it conflicts with the First Amendment. We have the freedom of expression in this country, the freedom of thought. People are more than welcome to make any idols they want and worship as many as they choose. But the Constitution also explicitly prohibits the idea of punishing innocent children. So no attainder of treason shall work a corruption of blood is found in Article 3, Section 3. And that specifically says that if you are arrested, charged, and found guilty of treason, your children will not be held guilty. And obviously it conflicts with the bedrock principle of our system of justice that we only punish the guilty and that there is a presumption of innocence. I mean, I can't imagine something like this happening in our society. There are some societies around the world where you could see it happening, but certainly not here. So again, I think there is a complete and utter conflict with this commandment and our foundations. The third, you shall not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Do we have any lawyers in the house? So anybody, the term void for vagueness is a term that floats around in law, which is a law that doesn't tell you what it is prohibiting is automatically void. It's against the 14th Amendment and the 5th Amendment. The Due Process Clause is right there. It has it. And obviously, this goes completely against the freedom of speech that is enshrined in our Constitution. So again, this conflicts with our foundations. Okay, the fourth one, we actually probably need to concede a little bit of influence here. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. You shall not do any work. But again, read the whole commandment. This references your male and your female slave. They cannot do any work either. And why? Because in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but rested on the seventh day. So first, the reason that we're celebrating the Sabbath is because an all-powerful being decided to take a break. Okay, so we're celebrating lazy omnipotence, as I like to refer to it. But we do need to concede a little bit of influence here. On the Sunday closing laws, first of all, is Sunday really the Sabbath? There's a good argument to be made that it's not. Jews don't celebrate it on Sunday, they celebrate it on Saturday. And second of all, the courts have actually said that Sunday closing laws can only be upheld on non-religious grounds. So even that influence, I mean, that's not really, that integral to our founding. So it's a tiny, tiny influence, and it's probably, not that important. But it did have an influence on the slavery issue in this country. Again, these are God's 10 moral laws, and it condones slavery right there in black and white. So virtually every justification for slavery, and there's a great new book apparently out on this that I haven't had a chance to read, America Aflame. If anybody reads it, shoot me an email. I'm really interested to read it. Where apparently the author is hypothesizing that the Civil War was really caused by the resurgence of evangelical Christianity in the South. Anyway, that was total non sequitur. But slavery was at the time supported by the Bible, and this was the main argument that its proponents used, was biblical justifications for slavery. Fifth, so yeah, we'll conclude it. We'll concede an influence, but it's again a shameful influence, or almost nothing. Fifth, honor your mother and father. Again, this one, read the whole thing. This is promising you a reward if you honor your mother and father. And this is the land that the Lord God is giving you. That's the land that he promised to give them after killing everybody else who lived on that land. I don't really see this as having an influence at all in our laws. If anybody sees it, ask me a question afterwards or come up to me and let me know. So no influence. Now I'm going to group some of these next ones together. 6, 8, 9, you shall not murder, or thou shalt not kill. Those are two very different things. The interpretation matters there. You shall not steal, and you shall not bear a false witness against your neighbor. Okay? So these are the ones that people always fall back on. Whenever I get this claim that we're founded on the Ten Commandments, nobody ever mentions the other commandments. Most of the people don't know what the other commandments are. First of all, these are not Judeo-Christian laws. Every single society that we know of has had some formulation of these laws. Societies do not survive without laws like this. Okay? And second of all, the Judeo-Christian formulation is not as moral as it appears. Okay? So let's back up for 1 second. You can see that the ninth commandment there ends with the term your neighbor. Now, in the original biblical text, there are no punctuation marks. There are no breaks between paragraphs. There are line breaks, but basically this is just one long set, of words and letters. Everything added afterwards was added by interpretation. Okay? So those phrases could really mean don't kill your neighbor, don't steal from your neighbor, don't murder your neighbor. It could be neighbor applies to each and every aspect of that law, not just don't bear false witness against your neighbor. And I believe that that is the more appropriate interpretation. And I think if you look at the Bible itself and what goes on nearby in the text, this makes more sense. So, this is my hypothesis. Don't kill your neighbor, don't steal from your neighbor, don't commit adultery with your neighbor, don't lie to your neighbor, and don't covet your neighbor's property. That's the way that it should actually be interpreted. Okay? So then the question becomes, who is your neighbor? And if you look very close to the Ten Commandments in the Bible, the term neighbor is used several other places. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against any of your people. So it interprets neighbor as any of your people. Again, you can see it again in Leviticus just before that, 19:16. And if you look, constantly this keeps coming up. And remember when Moses ordered the slaughter of 3,000 of his friends, brothers, and neighbors. Okay? So neighbor refers to your people, the children of your people, the sons of your own people, and your countrymen. In other words, it's your fellow believers. So it's not as moral as it appears. And this actually plays out with the story of the Bible. So after God gives the command to not kill, the next books of the Bible show the Israelites slaughtering people after people after people. These are the genocides that I found in the Bible as I was reading. The few books, Joshua in particular, I counted something like 130 separate genocides that happen after God says don't kill. Now that only makes sense, and that's only acceptable under their code of law if he's saying don't kill other people who believe as you believe. These people are not fellow believers, so the laws don't apply to them. So I believe that that is actually the better interpretation of these laws, making them considerably less moral than the interpretations that we have used and that other societies have used. Okay? So, first of all, they're not Judeo-Christian. Second of all, they're not that moral. You shall not commit adultery. That also would be only applying to your neighbor. But I pulled this one out specifically to deal with it because I think we actually have to concede a little bit of influence here. I mean, our country has a shameful history of legislating on sex. These are the Lovings. There's a famous case called Loving versus Virginia. And in that case, there was a law that said the separate races could not intermarry. And the justification for that law is right here. Almighty God created the races, white, black, yellow, Malay, and red, and he placed them on separate continents. The fact that he separated the races shows that he did not intend for the races to mix. So that was the justification for it. Obviously, homosexuality has also been burdened with this. There was actually the Supreme Court in 1986 wrote that decisions of individuals relating to homosexual conduct have been subject to state intervention throughout the history of Western civilization. Condemnation of those practices is firmly rooted in Judeo-Christian moral and ethical standards. So I think that we probably have to concede that this commandment has had an influence on our country's history, but again, this is a shameful influence that we should be running away from, and if the Christian nationalists want to make that claim, they're more than welcome to it. And finally, the 10th commandment. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, your neighbor's wife, women, your chattel, congratulations. Male or female slave, again, slavery is implicitly accepted here, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. This is thought crime. In our country, thought is protected. You are free to think whatever you want. We only punish you when you act on those thoughts. So this is completely contradictory to our First Amendment, and the freedom of expression, the freedom of speech, all of that implied, everything in that is implied that you have the freedom to think the way that you desire. Just, again, it depends on acting. And I had one person raise an issue about hate crimes when I had this up, and he said, well, hate crimes punish people for thinking a certain way, and that's not true. Virtually, and if anybody wants to talk to an awesome criminal lawyer, my wife would be happy to talk to you about this later, but every crime, well, not every crime, most crimes have a mental element to them. And the same is true with hate crime. So if you beat somebody up because they're gay, you're being arrested and charged with beating them up. And then the fact that they're gay and you were doing it because they're gay isn't kind of an aggravator to that. So if you just don't like them because they're gay, that's protected. You're allowed to do that. So it's not quite the same thing, and I can expound on that more if people want to hear more about that later. But to conclude the 10 Commandments, most of them, 1, 2, 3, and 10, are in direct conflict with our Constitution. The 5th one had no influence. The 4th one and the 7th one had a shameful, bigoted influence. And then the ones that everybody relies on are not Judeo-Christian, and the Judeo-Christian formulation is not that moral. Okay? So that kills the 10 Commandments. Now I have to move on to the Holy Bible. And I did try to do this honestly. I tried to pull out the most important Judeo-Christian principles to see if they influenced our founding. And I went and I looked, what are the major themes? I read the Bible to do this. I read the Bible cover to cover. It took me 2 years. It was not that fun. And if anybody would like these little fun stickers, FFRF sells them. It's really fun when you run across one in a hotel. So first, obedience is a major Judeo-Christian principle. The Bible is rife with the idea that you must obey. These are just some random quotes that I pulled out. But even the major stories in the Bible are all about obedience. If you remember the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, and Lot and his wife are fleeing Sodom and Gomorrah, and the angel tells them, whatever you do, don't look back, don't peek. And Lot's wife turns around and sees the cities being destroyed, and she's turned into a pillar of salt for peeking. And then obviously the story of Isaac and Abraham. I'm sure you're all familiar with this. God orders Abraham to sacrifice his son, and this is held up as this great kind of bowing down to God, this obedience to God as this great thing. He was saved at the last minute, and for some reason people think that makes the whole story acceptable. This I suggest to you is antithetical to the foundations of our country. We were founded on the idea of freedom, not servility. Edmund Burke, an English statesman at the time of the Revolution, said that a love of freedom is the predominating feature of the Americans. The fierce spirit of liberty is stronger in the English colonies than in any other people. One of the purposes of the Constitution is to secure the blessings of liberty. And Thomas Paine wrote that government is there to secure liberty for all men. And actually, I was just reading another book, a biography of Washington, and in it, when the city of New York, during the Revolutionary War, the city of New York was occupied by the British. And after the treaty was signed, they evacuated the city, and this British soldier was on his ship, and apparently he forgot something, so he went back to the town, and he was astounded that this unruly mob that he had been trying to keep in line for 10, 15 years during the Revolution was all of a sudden completely docile. And he said that the Americans are only able to be governed by themselves. And I think that's actually pretty poignant. Self-government is what we were fighting for at that time, and that requires freedom, not obedience from some, kind of celestial dictator, as Hitchens used to say. So again, I think this is a complete and fundamental conflict between Judeo-Christian principles and ours. The golden rule. This is often held up as a Judeo-Christian principle, and it is not. The Judeo-Christians have their own formulation. This is a list of other formulations, most of which predate Judeo-Christianity by a significant amount. I mean, I think you could ask most children, what does it mean to be a good person? And they would come up with something pretty close to this. This is a universal human rule that each and every one of us can adhere to without regard to what we believe, whether or not we believe Jesus died on the cross and then was resurrected for our sins. So to claim this for Judeo-Christianity, is what you need to attack when people make this claim. Hell. So this can't be called really a Judeo-Christian principle. It's more properly just a Christian principle. In the Hebrew Bible, there's a place called Sheol, but it's not really the eternal torture and torment that is hell. Hell is described as a place where the worm dieth not and the fire is not quenched. It's a burning wind, a fiery oven, judgment by fire, an unquenchable fire, a furnace of fire, eternal fire, and eternal punishment. So you get the sense that it's hot, and you get the sense that it's forever. Okay? I don't know if you can see what's going on in this picture here, but it does look pretty nasty. This is the Eighth Amendment. We prohibit cruel and unusual punishment in this country. And I think that the very idea of hell is fundamentally opposed to what the Eighth Amendment lays out as a protection for each and every person who the government is charging or incarcerating. And actually, the Supreme Court said in a case that being in jail with a 5-pack-a-day smoker is cruel and unusual punishment. So I think being an eternity of hellfire also qualifies. Finally, the Christian principle is vicarious redemption, the idea that Jesus died for your sins. Okay? Without that, there is no Christianity. This is the central theme. If it means anything, this is Christianity. So just try to imagine a system of justice based on this idea for a minute. Just think of the complete and utter chaos that would reign. Or really any society, it all kind of boils down to the idea of personal responsibility. And this is a total abrogation of personal responsibility. And you can imagine, a defendant, on the stand saying, well, Your Honor, I may have done those terrible things, but it's okay because I've accepted Jesus Christ and He is my Savior. And He has saved me, so you don't have to send me to jail. Yeah, it's okay. This system of justice actually exists not in this country, but on this planet. It is the Catholics dealing with the priests who rape children. They do not send them to the secular authorities. They try to handle them on their own. And I think it's something that we really need to be working on in this country to change. There actually are 2 prosecutors, one in Tennessee or Kentucky, I think, and another one in Pennsylvania, who are really trying hard to get the Pope on trial. So we'll see. So to conclude, first of all, there are a lot more of those that I could do. You have the immutability of God's law versus the amendability of our Constitution. I think is a fun one that I could get into. Original sin versus the presumption of innocence. There's a claim floating around that the separation of powers is based on a particular phrase in the Bible, which is also a fun one because that phrase doesn't actually separate the powers. It says that God has all those powers. But this is what I would like to leave you with today. This is kind of my battle cry at FFRF. I have it up on my wall and I read it pretty often. James Madison wrote this when he was addressing a bill that the Virginia legislature was putting forth to add a 3-penny tax on everybody to support Christian teachers throughout the colony. And this was, he said, it's proper to take alarm at the first experiment in our liberties. And we hold this prudent jealousy to be the first duty of citizens. So it's a duty for you to get out there and to rebut these claims, I think. The claim that we are founded as a Christian nation or are founded on a Judeo-Christian principle does have real-world effects. Those 10 Commandments that are going up on public property are being used to justify other violations of the First Amendment. And actually, the Supreme Court, in a ridiculous opinion, upholding a set of 10 Commandments on the lawn in Austin at the state capitol in Texas, one of the reasons they held it up was because nobody had complained in the 30 years. And actually, FFRF had complained. We just didn't. Nobody bothered to ask us if we had when the Supreme Court made this assertion. So you have to get out there and you have to kind of raise your voice, and you can't be quiet when you see something going on. Take alarm at the first experiment on your liberties. Thank you.